Between 1991 and 1999, there was a new Street Fighter game released almost every year, sometimes even more than one a year. But then, at the turn of the millennium, everything changed, and Street Fighter went into hibernation for nearly a decade. The so-called Dark Age of Street Fighter sent ripples throughout the entire fighting game community, changing the scene forever. I'm Caboose with the Leaderboard, and this is the tale of the rise, fall, and triumphant resurrection of Street Fighter, the series that put fighting games on the map. Flashback to the early 90s, while the arcade scene was still going strong, the market had cooled significantly since the golden age of Pac-Man and Space Invaders. The growing popularity of home consoles and handheld gaming made it so that the average gamer didn't even have to leave their house to experience premier interactive entertainment. It seemed like the arcade's best days were behind them, until early 1991, when Capcom dropped a little game called Street Fighter II: The World Warrior. Believe it or not, the game didn't instantly set the world on fire, for a very simple reason. Arcade patrons didn't realize it was a game best experienced in head-to-head multiplayer, opting instead for these single-player modes until gaming magazines started singing the praises of its intense versus gameplay. Before long, Street Fighter II was destroying records worldwide, becoming the #1 grossing game of the year for every single region in which it was released. In America alone, individual cabinets were generating $1,300 to $1,400 in revenue per week. The game nearly single-handedly revived gradually waning interest in arcade gaming, accounting for more than half of all coin-op revenue within its first 3 years of release. And of course, once Capcom realized what a gem they had on their hands, they weren't going to let anything get in the way of Street Fighter II's momentum. And so started the waves upon waves of updates and revisions for their flagship brawler. 1992 saw the release of Street Fighter II Champion Edition, which made the 4 Shadaloo boss characters, M. Bison, Sagat, Vega, and Balrog into playable fighters. Street Fighter II Hyper Fighting launched later that year, adding new special moves and faster-paced gameplay to suck more quarters from patrons' pockets. Then in '93, we saw the release of Super Street Fighter II: The New Challengers, and another 4 new characters, including the ever-popular Cammy. You win! Perfect! Then finally in 1994, the game's legendary arcade run was capped off with Super Street Fighter II Turbo, the game which arguably gave birth to esports in its earliest form. 5 whole iterations deep, Super Turbo, as it came to be known, delivered the smoothest and deepest gameplay an arcade fighter could ever offer at the time, leading to the birth of a burgeoning competitive scene for the game, which remained active for decades after its release. Street Fighter was on top of the world. What started as a wildly successful arcade game led way to a multimedia empire that included action figures, cartoons, comic books, and even the production of the second Hollywood film ever to be based on a video game. But by this point, 3 years into its reign, Capcom knew that they'd have to move past Street Fighter II if they wanted to keep the games fresh and the audiences captivated. What was their solution? Well, it was Street Fighter Alpha, an all-new prequel sub-series featuring new characters, new graphics, and updated gameplay which offered more strategic and mechanical depth than any of its predecessors. At this point, the Sony PlayStation was widely available, and the more powerful hardware allowed Street Fighter Alpha's home console ports to match the fidelity of their arcade originals. A significant advantage, as it allowed the franchise to retain its foothold even in regions where arcades were scarce. But Capcom wasn't the only company taking advantage of the fighting game boom. While Street Fighter II was far from the first fighting game to be released, it was by far the most popular and influential, and it wasn't long before its success paved the way for a treasure trove of other incredible games, with such greats as Midway Games' Mortal Kombat, Sega's Virtua Fighter, SNK's Fatal Fury, King of Fighters, and Samurai Showdown series, and of course, Namco's Tekken. There was no shortage of top-tier competitors wanting to prove themselves in the arcade arenas. 1997 marked the beginning of the end for the golden age of Capcom's groundbreaking series. It had been more than half a decade since the release of the World Warrior, and the market was rapidly evolving. A new wave of fighters with cutting-edge 3D graphics and gameplay were sweeping the community, and if Capcom wanted Street Fighter to keep up, they would have to evolve the series. Their previous attempt, 1996's Arika-developed Street Fighter EX, featured 3D graphics, but still 2D gameplay. While initially successful, it failed to catch on in the same manner as its predecessors, culminating in limited availability outside of Japan and steadily decreasing sales numbers for each new iteration of its home console port. So instead of venturing onwards into the brave new world of 3D, Capcom retreated to the tried and true familiar world of hand-drawn sprites and backgrounds. Enter Street Fighter 3: New Generation. Street Fighter 3 was, in some ways, the company's most ambitious release since the dawn of the fighting game craze. As the first Street Fighter game to run on Capcom's new disc-based CP System 3 arcade board, New Generation featured gameplay and graphics that were vastly improved over Street Fighter Alpha and Street Fighter 2. And that name wasn't just for show. Either to push the idea that was truly the next evolution of the Street Fighter series, the game did away with all of the fan-favorite familiar characters, save for poster boys like Ryu and Ken. This resulted in an all-new roster of flashy fighters like dandy pugilist Dudley, teenage ninja Ibuki, and New Generation's de facto protagonist, golden-haired wrestler Alex. Ambition doesn't always translate into success, and it quickly became apparent that New Generation had perhaps bitten off more than it could chew. The dual controversies of rejecting 3D and replacing beloved characters with unproven newbies made what should have been a bold new step forward for the series crash and burn right out of the gate. The game struggled to make profit even in its home country of Japan, in part thanks to its then titanic budget of 1 billion yen, which would have been $9.5 million USD nowadays. While precise global sales figures aren't known, New Generation failed to scrape even 10,000 cabinets sold worldwide, a far cry from the more than 60,000 sold for Street Fighter 2's first iteration. Normally, a game that flounders in arcades can hope to recoup costs via home console ports, but there was just one small problem with Street Fighter 3. Thanks to the advanced CPS3 hardware powering it, the game was simply too immense to be scaled down for any home consoles available circa 1997. Fans would have to wait 3 full years for a console powerful enough to run Street Fighter 3, and even then, the port ended up debuting on the ill-fated Sega Dreamcast, further kneecapping its profitability and reach.
Coming to a Dreamcast near you.
Despite these issues, Street Fighter 3 featured the best graphics and gameplay in the series thus far, and Capcom would further improve the game with Second Impact and Third Strike updates in late 1997 and 1999 respectively. But the damage had already been done. The title that Street Fighter had pinned all of its hopes and dreams on had failed to meet expectations both critically and financially, being continually outperformed by the latest 2 versions of Street Fighter Alpha and Street Fighter 2 even years after they ceased production. It was clear that Street Fighter's heyday had come to a close, and after nearly a decade of annual releases, the turn of millennium marked the first year without a new Street Fighter arcade game since the genesis of the fighting game boom. It was the dawn of the dark age of Street Fighter. For the next several years, the only Street Fighter titles released would be straight-to-console port compilations, such as Street Fighter Anniversary Collection and Alpha Anthology. Long gone were the days of the franchise's multimedia dominance, with a select few Street Fighter projects seeing the light of day for most of the early aughts. The king had been dethroned, and its sudden absence spawned stagnation and growth. While Capcom was switching lanes and began to focus on other properties like Resident Evil or Monster Hunter, both of which actually ended up becoming more profitable series over Street Fighter, other fighting game developers started to emerge to fill that void that was left by Street Fighter's absence. Arc System Works, a company which had toiled away making licensed games and ports for the most of the 90s, surged into relevance with the popularity of its Guilty Gear fighting game series. Namco continued to set the standard for 3D fighters with Tekken, but also breathed new life into its Soul Calibur series of weapon-based fighters. And let's not forget about Nintendo, whose Super Smash Bros. Games hit the scene just as Street Fighter was on the way out, pioneering the platform fighter subgenre before laying down an all-time classic with Super Smash Bros. Melee, one of the most enduring and beloved competitive games of all time. Within the Street Fighter community, the Dark Age proved to be a contentious period. While the series started to fall out of the public eye at large, the competitive scene experienced a massive surge of growth in the lead up to the franchise's extended hiatus. The tournament scene had existed since the World Warrior days, paving the way for legendary players like Alex Valle, Daigo Umehara, and Justin Wong. But it was the establishment of the Evolution Championship Series in 2002 that united the local scenes into a global community. EVO's high profile and unprecedented payouts pivoted Street Fighter from a mere hobby into a legitimate esport for many players, offering a prime opportunity for aces from all over the world to face off and decide who is the best of the best. There's no better moment to exemplify EVO's symbol as a beacon in the Dark Age than the play that would become known as the EVO moment number 37, aka the Daigo Parry. It was the loser's final match of the 2004 Street Fighter III Third Strike tournament, with local legend Justin Wong squaring off against Daigo the Beast Umehara. In order to survive the chip kill, Daigo managed to pull off an advanced parry maneuver to neutralize every single hit in Justin's super move, winning the match in an explosive show of Street Fighter mastery.
Everyone's going crazy in the background, right? I'm like thinking like, oh, maybe he'll mess up, but he doesn't mess up.
It is a moment that inspired many to get into fighting games and generated renewed interest in Street Fighter as a franchise, which may have started the gears turning for Street Fighter's eventual return. It's now 2007, 8 years since the release of the last new entry in the Street Fighter series. While by this point, fighting games as a whole have fallen out of the public eye, as many major franchises like Tekken and Mortal Kombat were pivoting more towards home console releases and single-player content, Street Fighter's legacy has been kept alive by enthusiasts and the competitive scene. Then one day, fans' prayers are answered as Capcom delivers a new announcement out of the blue like manna from heaven. They had learned from their mistakes, to say the least. Not only was Street Fighter IV the first mainline Street Fighter game to feature high-definition 3D graphics, but the roster also brought back all of the original World Warriors, plus a smattering of new faces, striking a good balance between nostalgia and innovation. A well-received arcade release in 2008 whetted global appetites for Street Fighter's grand return, and when it finally released on home consoles in 2009, the excitement reached a fever pitch. Selling more than 3 million copies in its first month on the market, Street Fighter IV was acclaimed by fans and critics alike as a fighting game enthusiast's dream come true. The game's high-profile release put the fighting game genre back in the spotlight, and much like how Street Fighter II paved the way back in '91, Street Fighter IV would usher in a second, albeit smaller, fighting game boom. Street Fighter IV's first year at EVO caused attendance to nearly triple. Over 1,000 people registered for EVO's Street Fighter IV tournament, dwarfing the number of registrants for all other featured games combined.
Not impossible from some ranges.
No guard beater in this game either.
That's right.
He tends to block for a while sometimes.
Oh, he based an Umi Shoryu. Oh, but misses the combo, and the crowd does not like that. Oh, that's a stand fierce check.
USA! 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 USA!
Street Fighter IV left such an impact that the fighting game community marks its release as the birth of the new generation of competitors, dividing the community into the old guards who've been around since the Street Fighter II days, and the new faces who got their start with Street Fighter IV, sometimes facetiously referred to as the 09ers. In the years since, fighting games have experienced unprecedented prestige both as consumer products and as esports. And while the genre hasn't been as popular as it was in the golden age, the addition of stable online play and greater number of community-run events mean the FGC has never felt larger or more inviting. Street Fighter netcode still needs a bit of work though, let's be honest. Not every game franchise is able to survive long periods of dormancy, but Street Fighter's warrior spirit and dedicated fanbase allowed it to take a beating and keep on fighting back even long after Capcom seemed to have abandoned it. While the dark age of Street Fighter is now but a fleeting memory to those who have enjoyed non-stop Street Fighter content since the 09 revival, its cause, effects, and ultimate end serve as important reminders. Official support can come and go, but community is forever. And so long as Street Fighter fanatics keep practicing their Hadoukens, Street Fighter will never die. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the leaderboard for more videos like this.